Hi, Dr. Wong. I hope this video finds you well given the circumstances. And I just wanted to say I appreciate all that you've done for me as far as the leniency with regards to CS497 and the design project. I'm happy to announce that I have finished the report, and I'm going to give you kind of a quick presentation in this video using OBS software, kind of walk you through the different aspects and modules of the project and give you kind of a live demo of the functionality. If you require anything else, please let me know. I'm happy to provide the source code. I'll put that up on GitHub and provide links to the repositories that contain those items, and you're welcome to do with those what you like, or if you want me to put those up on CS server, just let me know. So today I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the, the major aspects of the project. This is regarding my project, the Pharmacy to You desktop notification and management system for Deaconess Hospitals. The sponsor is Miranda Chu Allen, who's with the Business Development Office at Deaconess. My advisor is Dr. Deborah Wong, and I, of course, am James Allen, computer science student, senior, and hopefully soon to be graduate. Kind of walk you through a little bit of some of the background of this. As you may recall from the report, the process was created for an internal ordering system at Deaconess in which they were taking online orders and looking to update their internal processes. They had a program in place up until about May of 2020 called the Pharmacy to You program, in which they would take online orders of prescription medications that were coordinated with other aspects of Deaconess Hospital and over-the-counter medications and food supplies and miscellaneous convenience items, and had a delivery service for patients at their home or at at their place of employment or however. And there was this kind of convoluted process in which the patients would place an online order, and then it triggered a series of emails and a series of paper trails that needed to be processed by the pharmacist at Gateway Hospital. And so, as we know, Deaconess has two facilities. They have the Midtown as well as the Gateway facility and a bunch of satellite clinics all around the region. And so there was this kind of this disconnect on who would process the orders, how do we update the information, and those kind of things. One of the biggest problems that they had is that the pharmacist himself had no way to update, the item availability, the item pricing, and item description, or add new items or delete existing items from their illicit selected services when they were the ones that were responsible for that functionality. Instead, what they had to do is they had to contact the business development office to manually make updates to the website that the patients were using on their intranet system. And it was just a huge delay that there would be phone calls back and forth several days or several times per day. And they would there's this huge disconnect, and the opportunities for errors that not be quickly corrected, whether it be in pricing or typos or any of that kind of thing. There's a public perception problem that was possible as a result of that. And so the pharmacist and the BDO both decided they wanted to come up with some sort of automated system that gave more control to the pharmacist, for being able to develop that. And that's where this project comes in. Now, in the proposal, I talked about a lot of the features and the available items that they had, and so that this video will focus more on what was done and kind of a walkthrough of the system. So it pretty much breaks down into three separate categories. Okay, there were 5 components that they originally wanted. One was the inventory management system. The other was the order management system. They wanted some sort of monitoring system. They wanted user permission controls, and then they also were requesting some statistical tools that would be used by the business development office. Obviously, this was a huge project, and during the scope of the last year and a half that this has been going on, up until the point that it was canceled in May of 2020, the scope of the project was creeping a lot on what they wanted to be able to do and the vision that they had for this. So as I've hinted to, in May of 2020, the project was canceled. Of course, as you know, my time working on the project was prematurely cut short in March when the COVID pandemic hit, and we were forced to change all of our teaching styles to online. And so my attention had to be my classes, and you graciously allowed me to delay this. Well, in that delay period, Deaconess decided that they were no longer going to offer this program just because of the low use. They had grand visions of this thing being wildly popular, but it just wasn't proving out. So they decided to not pursue it at this time. Whether that was driven by COVID or not, I don't know. But all I know is that I was notified in early May, late April, that they were no longer going to be doing this program and they didn't need this software package. And when that happened, it pretty much just killed my inspiration to be able to wanting to do this. Now, I believe I've done enough work to hopefully qualify as a senior design project, and that's what I'm going to show you today in everything that we're doing here. So we'll kind of get ourselves going at that point. Talk a little bit about the design approach. This is a C# Windows 10 program. They wanted C# and they wanted a .NET framework because they do have some older existing systems in place using Windows 7 all the way back as far as Windows 7 machines. And not all of their machines are currently up to Windows 10, so I wasn't able to do a UWP type of program, which is fine by me because my background is more WPF anyway, so I'm happy with that change. They do have some issues with the database. They wanted a database integration, obviously. Well, where most of the databases that I've learned how to use were SQL or MySQL or Postgres or something like that. They were using a system that tied into their online platform known as Kentico, and there was Kentico the 11th edition, and I know nothing about that. They did say that they were thinking about rolling over to an SQL server, so I went ahead and developed it for SQL with the idea that we could make it work with Kentico if I was given the schema and a method to interact with the code. One of the challenges of this project, obviously, is that because of HIPAA requirements, data and privacy of patient information was an utmost concern to them. So I was never allowed to see actual patient data. All I was given was the schema to the databases. And one of the major problems that came out of this schema they had was that their Kentico system, for whatever reason, whether it's not possible in Kentico or they just hadn't done it, there were no foreign keys in any of the tables, and there were 10 or 12 different tables available on this system. So, yeah. So my ability to be able to do quick merges and joins on tables using common SQL commands couldn't do, and so I had to write code that would manually do the merges and the joins so that I could interact with their database as it's currently written without having to have them reconstruct the database, insert all these foreign keys, which would have made things so much easier. So there's a lot of work that was done with the database integration. To help with some of the reading and the writing from the SQL database, I utilized a framework known as Entity Framework. And so we were using Entity Framework 7 to be able to do all that. And so I was able to build the database models and have my program interact with the Entity Framework methods to be able to read and write out of the database context or set up that way. So that's kind of where we're at. So what I'll do is I'll kind of walk you through kind of the different phases of the project. There were two different phases of this project. One was up through from summer of 2019 up until early December 2019 when my laptop experienced a hardware failure. Okay, the logic board on my laptop died and took with it all the functionality on my computer. Now, fortunately, I learned my lesson a long time ago to have backups, and I had a GitHub repository that I was pushing all my live code up, so didn't lose much there. But the database itself that I had created for using all this, using their schema, somehow the actual database file was corrupted, or I wasn't able to retrieve it or reopen it. I'm not exactly sure what was going on with that. So there's a lot of work that was done using the Entity Framework and the SQL database that I have since rebuilt the database. But at the time of that crash, I was just so thoroughly disgusted, honestly, with it that I said, well, I'm going to turn my attention to something else for a little while and I'll come back to this. And so in January of 2020, my attention switched. And I think some of the stuff that I did during that second phase greatly helped the possibility of this project coming to completion. And I was able to work with, there were a lot of upgrades and refinements that I was able to do, and some of the challenges that I had with the existing setup, the pre-2020 set of modules that were created versus the ones that were after that. And then at the end, at the kind of in June, February timeframe, when they thought this was still going to be the program they wanted to pursue, they also made the change for me that instead of being one hosted server, hosted computer competing to database. They wanted the ability to be able to have satellite clients being able to tie into this thing. So I had to develop a TCP/IP kind of communications module from scratch, and that was test driven in a project that I did for Dr. Blanford and Mr. Randall's class, the CS497 as part of their network reversey. And so I wrote that code while working on that project in January, February, with the intent of being able to pull that library and put it into this. And so a lot of the abilities in that library would have been used in this project had it ever come to fruition, so to say. But because the project was canceled, it was never incorporated. But I did do the work on that, so I'm going to use that as part of this discussion as well. We'll talk a little bit about it. All right, so I'm going to switch my screens here, and we'll start with the first application. I know I've been a little bit long-winded, and I apologize for that. But we'll get ourselves going here. So let's see. A camera on the left screen, so I can look at this. So here I'm in Visual Studio. If I go in and I start the application, the first one I'm going to show you is the applications. And as you see over here, there's a DNA framework, which is part of an inversion of control, and I'll talk about what I was doing there and some of the issues I was having and why that was needed. Here's the entity framework stuff, and you can see that if I look at where is it? I think it's that one. But this is the databases that the entity framework was seeing in the SQL server that I had. So these are all the databases. You can see there's a bunch of them, different pharmacy items, different statuses, a whole bunch of tables, and none of them are interconnected to each other. Entity framework has the ability to work with foreign keys, but as I stated earlier, there were no foreign keys in this table, so I had to work with all of these tables manually. I also had to produce some generic data for testing, and so you'll see things like food item 102 and customer 111 were all procedurally generated within this entity framework database program that I had. Okay, so there's two parts of it. There's the actual connection, which is this EDMX part, and then there's an actual application that I made that actually preloads all of this data. And so I run it once, and it will populate my server with the data that I need to do. So most of the time, I'm not running that application. Okay, so that's the first piece of it. The next I have a couple of other libraries that are all about the styling and the coloring and some of the animations that are seen. There's the pop-up database monitor, which is this guy, which I'll show you here in a second. But the main application is kind of the heart of what I want to show. So I'll start this. You'll see that it comes up fairly quickly. And so this would be the start of it. Now, it's not totally complete, but this is a custom window that's created. Originally, they had wanted a login page and different user level controls. And again, that was a feature that was going to be added, but didn't get put in. But I can click that, and that would be the semblance of a login. And then that would throw you to the next page, which would be like a dashboard that would allow you to go. Now, what I can do is a few of these buttons, kind of the layout was that there are order statuses and being able to order print. And again, this is the first wave of applications, but the features that were created that would have been reused in the final combined module, I can see a couple of items here. So if I click on all orders here, it'll take it a second, and you can see that it goes through, and it's gone through my database and pulled out all 291 different orders that were created. Now, these orders in the database at this time don't actually have any food items or any over-the-counter medication items listed in them, but the actual order displaying and things can be shown here. And so it sorts all of the data, and you can see there's a whole bunch of these here. Information that is shown is I have an order ID, a customer ID for the order, the first name of the customer, the last name of the customer, the date that the order was created, and the phone. And apparently the date is not displaying at this time. I wonder why that. I'll have to take a look into that. But regardless, that date would be displaying here. There's also a dynamic status bar that indicates the different statuses of the orders as it goes through its pipeline from an order received to processing payment to being filled to out for delivery to return to completed. All of those are different, and there's this dynamic bar that shows up, and you can see that. So for this one, this is a status unknown, just kind of my generic default is all black bars. But if I scroll down a little bit, you can see that an orange bar, a single orange bar is that it's ready for payment. And then two yellow bars would be it's ready for packaging. The payment's been received, it's ready for packaging. The next one is ready for pickup, meaning that it's the packaging is complete. It's ready, waiting for the third-party vendor to come pick it up, and so forth and so on. Out for delivery, and you can see the rest of them. You can see that it dynamically changes. So the idea was that the pharmacist, as this thing moves through the pipeline, he would update the status, and these bars would dynamically update based on the status in the database. And if something started running long on time, then it would pop up an alert. Which again, that's not been not been ordered. Here's a status that the order was canceled or something. Maybe it would throw a warning or something that the pharmacist would know something was up and be able to track and be able to not lose an item within the flow process. The other feature that shows up on this is that this is just kind of a condensed list that if I hover over this, at the time, and I know you and I had talked about this and how it's kind of inconvenient. I went ahead and left it in this version because it changes in the next. Okay, but it's basically a display then of all of the other data tied to this order. The person, so you've got your mailing address, and this is a merge of a manual merge of all of those tables that I showed you, from customer data to order data. It would pull food details, OTC details, delivery details, which weren't populated at this time as I was setting this up. So that's the general order information window that's set here. It does have search functionality. If I click the search button, I have a search window that animates in. And from this, I can search by order ID. So say I want to find an order with the number 22 in it, and then as soon as I change the attention, it should. And it's not doing it, of course. How about I do a new order? I can filter by new orders. Order filters only. It works on the food one. Okay, I can search by names and so forth and so on. But I can search by new orders, and you can see now it's only, it should be. Now it's not doing it. Ready for payment, didn't show up. Let's unclick that and unclick that. Through the search. There we go. Let's have it completed. There we go. So the completed, you can see that it triggers the completed, and only the completed ones will search up here. If I cancel them, there weren't any canceled orders. How about returned? Well, this is great for a final presentation. Thing is not working, right? Okay. Anyway, but that's where we are on that. The food admin page then is the other thing that the administration wanted was an inventory management system, which is these aspects that are happening over here. So if I go to the food admin on this, it'll take a second to load all the food items. Here they come. Okay, and so there are several different things that they can do here. So you can see I have food item 0. It's, they wanted to know whether it was liquid or solid or some other type. I guess presumably if they're sending soup, they wanted to make sure there were special precautions for transporting liquids or whatever the case may be. And then there's a food price, and then is the item taxable, and all of this would be capable here. So if I go and I look at, I have a search bar for this as well. Let's try this one again. Let's do 22 and do find foods. Now you can see that for anything with the number 22, here's item 22, 122, 220, 221. You can search by food item number. You can search by name. You can search by food type. Okay, and so forth and so on. So clear the search, and then I can close. Okay. So when I go back, you also have the option I can add a food, which means I can now create a food. Now, one thing that needs to be done in this is that the ID should be automatically generated, not keyed in by the user, because otherwise you might get some duplicates. So that is one thing that would have to be corrected. But you would just simply put the food name and the food type, and then it would populate the list accordingly. And then once you populated the list, you would hit create, and it would then dynamically add to the list, and then I could cancel. And then I could come down, and at the bottom of the list, once I made the item, there is an edit button here that allows me to come in and I can edit information related to that particular food item. I can change the name, I can change the description, I can change the price, taxable, so forth and so on. And then when I hit save, it would save. And this is basically, it's looking for a matching item, or else it was going to make a new one. This is a debugging window. And then the changes are triggered, and that's the command that would write it back to the database. And so that's the case that we have here. And so that's what's happening here. And then the OTC medication would have a very similar window for the over-the-counter medication items that would be happening here. Now, again, there are some display issues that need to be corrected, but that's kind of the basis of where we were with the pharmacy to you application itself. There is obviously there's some need for some toolbars. There's some more status information, dates and times would probably be displayed. The colored boxes here were the BDO statistical tools. They wanted to be able to track the average order time, how long an order has been inactive, the average total time, and those kind of things. And that's where these would take advantage of the dates and the times of the records and be able to update so that for a given day, are they running on time? Are they running late? Kind of what's happening as part of kind of the statistical analysis tools of this particular program, the Pharmacy to You program that Deaconess is trying to employ. So that's that application. The other application that we have, and I'll have to switch, close the solution. And if I go to the second one, this is everything that was happening after the computer crash. When, like I say, I switched my attention, I started to reorganize the program. One of the problems that I was having was in the data bindings. Those and it was one of the problems that I was having with this, particularly with the search not working, was being able to get into a record that was being compiled from 4 different tables in 3 different data contexts and trying to be able to display that information and all the proper controls in the subforms. It was just becoming just an absolute nightmare to track those down and being able to get those to line up. And so after doing a little bit of reading online, I read about something called dependency injection and inversion of control, whereby I can assign the application to host the object and then register every object that I needed under the application and then be able to get to things a whole lot easier. So I decided that since I was restarting anyway, to set the project up to be able to do that. And so that's what I was doing with this. And so all those files are located in the IOC. Okay, it's just a simple container. At the same time, started seeing a lot of repetition of code in the application that I just showed you, and decided that, well, I needed to do something about that. And one of the problems, of course, that I had was not knowing what the database was going to be like and being able to talk to a particular type of data service. So what I did in this application, instead of generating all those records, I went ahead and just made a smaller subset within this application that is local, what I call mock data, just for kind of development purposes. Okay, and I defined it as an iData service interface. And then I also created the entity framework connection and redefined it as an iData service. And so I could treat both of them the exact same way. And the idea being that now if they wanted to continue using their Kiniko database, I could come in and make a Kiniko folder and rewrite the routines for that. As long as it implemented iData service, all of the other code would still work. And so that's what I did. And so there are a couple of other interfaces that have to do with the table constructions and the different data services that are on here. This one does not currently talk to the database using Entity Framework. Okay, it's set up to be able to do it once I make the connections, but this was more developing. I was focusing on this because, again, I was looking to reorganize things and reset up the project, and make it more of a true MVVM model view model format, which would allow, which the other one had a little bit of it but wasn't enough. This is pure MVVM here, where all the updates are done through the data bindings, and then all I have to do is change how views are handled, and I can switch easily from desktop to mobile to whatever I want to do, all by coordinating how the views feed into this particular project. And so it worked a lot smoother. That in conjunction with the IOC, it was so much easier to get data to pop up, and it just wasn't quite so cobbled together, and it was just aggravating to be able to do that. So yeah, so if I go through and I kind of started defining things as services. So I think my thinking and my development is a little bit more mature in looking at things this way. So I have a data service, which had to do with how the database was working. I also had a database manager service that would allow me to switch between Kiniko and SQL as needed. I had a dialog manager which would handle all of the different dialog windows that could pop up, whether it was a print dialog or a file manager dialog or whatever. I could just display this stuff and just basically switch states, and all of this would work out. Had file managers, so if they wanted to do this on a Linux system or a Mac or whatever, it wouldn't matter on those. The network manager was added later. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with this, so it's not actually implemented, but I thought, well, maybe there'd be different types of networks, whether it's an IPv4, an IPv6, or whatever, working there. And then, of course, a print manager to be able to handle printing to whether it was a physical printer, to an email, or to a text file would be handled through this. And this printing one is actually implemented except for the email. So I can print to PDF, or I can also print to paper coming out of this particular application. There's several other utilities and then the actual application. But you can see I have view models, views, and then my models are all set up. So it's a true MVVM pattern here. And it's just a lot cleaner and a lot more condensed and concise. So with that, I will start this. Okay, and so this becomes the actual application as it was rendered. So like I say, a lot of the same information, but a lot of different stuff. And there are pieces that aren't in this that were in the other that had that I come back to the project would have gotten merged and consolidated. I don't think it would have been a huge order to do that since I had all the code set up in the other one. But the way that it works, and so since I don't have any physical real-time connections, what I can do is I can come in and do the show orders on this. This is to emulate loading the order data from the data. So my mock data set was fairly small. It had 5 or 6 items. Okay, and so what it's done is it's gone out to the mock data base and pulled in all of the data. And so these would be my orders. And I know the writing's a little bit small on this, but you can see that I've got an order number, the date created, the customer ID, the pharmacy ID that generated it, and then the delivery ID, and then of course the current status. I just printed out the words instead of making that fancy bar for this one. Now this is a default image, but all I do is come in and I can click any one of these and it will populate this delivery confirmation form on this. And the idea was that once I had this, and this was all possible because of that IOC and being able to get to data a whole lot easier, now I can come in on this delivery confirmation, and for any of these things, these are all buttons, you can see that now I can change the pharmacy information. So say they needed to reroute from the pharmacy at Gateway to the pharmacy at Midtown, they could enter this information here, and then they could update and save the changes. So say, I changed this to pharmacy 202, I could save the changes, saving the data, pharmacy 202, and you can see that now it's updated here. And so the pharmacist had the power to update anything manually if he needed to. He could update the patient information, which obviously that hasn't been completed, but that's the placeholder screen that you saw there. He could add, remove, change food items, which would go here, same kind of deal. The different colors indicate it's a different window that's popping up. OTC meds could go here, and then of course, if there's any additional information or you need to change the tax or waive a fee or something, that would all be done here. These are all pieces that were coming, and all was a matter was just being able to complete this. This is where I was at the point dealing with the pharmacy, that it's that kind of same table, same same information thing, being able to handle all that. Okay, so anyway, that's what we have here. And I lost my print window, I think. Oh, because I didn't close the window. All right, so there's one of the bugs. Let me close this and bring it back. Awesome when things don't work on demos, right? Okay, all right, so that's what we have here. The other thing that came out of this, so I've selected one of these items, is that now I have the ability to go to printing. And so I could take this view and I could print it, and it will look exactly like this when it kicks out on the printer. So I can do a manual printer, I could do a fax if I wanted. That's kind of, it uses a default print window for all the system printers that Windows 10 knows. Okay, and so I could also do Microsoft Print to PDF. Okay, so let's just say I'm gonna do a PDF, and I can print this thing. Now it generates that same document in a flow document. It's actually a searchable flow document that I can now print this, and it saves it as a PDF file on my local hard drive in a predetermined designation location. Okay. Ideally, each one of these records could be saved as a PDF. And probably, this is one of the conversations I was going to have with the pharmacist, that do they want a PDF record of all of these invoices automatically, or do they just want to be able to pull it up in the file? Personally, I think a PDF backup would always be a good thing, but that was a discussion that we hadn't had, and obviously will not be having now. So that's the printing features of that. Okay, so that's kind of the basic functionality of where I was with this particular project. The other thing I need to show you, and I should have showed you this when I was in the other project. Let me close this again and go back to this. What was that? All right. So what I will do is I want to go and show you the pop-up, the active monitor system. Okay, so if I run that, see that it'll kick. And so what pops up now is this. This is kind of a placeholder window. This would ideally be an invisible window that nobody would see. I think the numbers that it's printing here are actually the display coordinates of where the window is popping up. All right, and so ideally what's happening is this is a process that's running on its own thread in the background that even if I close out of the application, this guy was still running. Okay, and what this thread does is it would basically sit back and it would monitor the database for any changes or additions or deletions to be able to notify that something has changed or a new order has been received by the in the pharmacy. This eliminates that paper that was automatically printed out. It would pop up. So what I've done is I've installed a button that will simulate a detection of a new order or a modified order. You can see that what happens is now the pop-up kind of comes over here, and it would sit here and it will sit here and blink on this. Now again, it's not formatted appropriately, and the pharmacist may have wanted this to be full window size. I could do that just by resizing this window, but it basically sits there and it just fades in and out, and it doesn't go away until the user acknowledges it. Now their ultimate wish was that if they weren't in the order management system, that when they hit acknowledge, that it would automatically take them to the order in the order management system. But at this point, it just closes the window. Okay, but that would be the next step, is to get it to open the order management system as well, and then populate it with the data. But that would involve being able to talk across multiple threads, and coming up with a good way to be able to accomplish that was, I guess, the next major challenge to be able to happen. So I've got a lot of parts done. It's just the final integration, wasn't completed. It would have been done, I firmly believe, by the deadline had we not been delayed with the pandemic and then project ultimately being canceled. So anyway, I guess that kind of is what I wanted to show you as far as the project goes. I hope it met with your approval. I know the talk is a little bit longer than normal and not a formal presentation, but I at least wanted to show you the parts of what it was capable of doing. Learned a lot about project scope and project creep, and how estimates of time are definitely very important, because I got sidetracked on a lot of little sub things. I spent more time on the animation than I probably should have, but and then at the end it didn't matter because I ended up changing everything. So it's some valuable lessons were learned, and I think that's the whole point of this project. So anyway, I appreciate everything that you did for me, have done for me, are doing for me. Thank you to Dr. Roberts, if he happens to see this, for all of his help. A lot of the setup on this new application all came as the results of direct conversations with him, and I appreciate all the time and support you guys have given me over these past few years. And I hope to someday be able to repay the favor at some point. So with that, I will close for the night. I will get this mailed off to you here momentarily. And again, I thank you for everything that you've done. I will talk to you soon. Take care, Deborah.